Okay, so before we look over the problems, just to review, a trinomial product will have two binomial factors. So that's what we're doing. We're taking a trinomial and figuring out what the two binomial factors are. Okay, now, there are 4 important questions before you start each problem. Is there a greatest common factor? Is it a trinomial? Are the degrees of the trinomial in descending order? And is the leading coefficient 1? Okay, so did these. All right, we're going to start with number 19. Let's see. Okay. Is there a greatest common factor? No. It is a trinomial, 3 terms. The degrees, which is the exponent of the variable, are in descending order, 2, 1, and then none. And the leading coefficient is a 1. So we'll start with our sets of parentheses. B times B is the only way to get B squared. This minus sign tells me the signs are going to be different. This tells me the larger number will be a plus. The factor pairs of 32 are 1 and 32, 2 and 16, 3 won't go into it, 4 and 8, 5 won't go into that, 6 won't go into that, 7 won't, and then 8 will, but we've already got it listed here. So now we look for the pair. The larger number is positive, so these will be positive, and this one will be negative, so positive 32 and a negative 1 does not give me 4. Positive 16 and a negative 2 does give me 4. It is 16 minus 2. Oh, no, 4, that's 14. Hello. Mistake on my very first problem. Okay. There we go. Positive 8 and a negative 4 equals a positive 4. So this will be a positive 8 and a negative 4. And then we check it using FOIL. Multiply first terms together, and I get B squared. Multiply outer term and inner term, and the outer and inner combine to give me that. Multiply last terms, I get a negative 32. Okay, so now we move to number 20. Is there a greatest common factor? No. It is a trinomial. It is in descending order, and the leading coefficient is 1. So I can go ahead and start. N times n is the only way to get n squared. And then for the signs, this tells me the signs will be different. This tells me the larger will be negative. Oh, so I'm going to put different signs. The factor pairs of 28 are 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 3 won't go into that, 4 and 7, 5 won't go into that, 6 won't go into that. We're back to 7. Okay, the factor pair, the larger is negative. So a negative 28 and a positive 1 do not give me a negative 3. I'm going to go ahead and skip here. A negative 7 and a positive 4 do give me a negative 3. So it'll be a minus 7 plus 4. Check using FOIL. First terms is that. Outer term is a 4 in, inner terms is a negative 7. Combine those to give me a negative 3 in. And then multiplying last terms, we get a negative 28. Okay. number 21. Okay. Is there a greatest common factor? No. It's a trinomial. It's in descending order, and the leading coefficient is a 1. So we can go ahead and start factoring. It'll be t times t, which gives me a t squared. The signs will be different, and the larger number will be positive. The factor pairs of 45 are 1 and 45. 2 won't go into that. 3 will go into that 15 times. 4 will not go into it. 5 will go into it. 6 won't, 7 won't, 8 won't. Okay, so now I know the larger number will be positive, the smaller number is negative. So a positive 9 and a negative 5 give me a positive 4. So it'll be a positive 9 and a negative 5. Check using FOIL. Multiply first terms together, multiply outer terms and inner terms, and they'll combine to give you the middle one. Multiply last terms together, and that works. Okay, 22. All right. Is there a greatest common factor? Let's see. Nope. Is this a trinomial? No, this is not a trinomial. It's 4 terms, so we will use grouping. All right. When you're using grouping, you group the first 2 terms together and the last 2 terms together. This will be 3 times A times A. This will be a negative 1 times 2 times B. They don't have anything in common. All right, so let's go over here. A negative 1 times 2 times 3 times A for the first term, and then for the second term, it's just A times B. They both have an A, and if I factor out the A, I'll be left with a negative 6 plus B. Well, that doesn't look like this. So these aren't going to factor using grouping, so here's a hint, and I threw this in here on purpose to put a hard one in here. Rearrange the order to make this work. So if I look at these 2, I see they both have something in common. And then I'm going to put these 2 together. Okay, let's try grouping them this way. 3 times A, and then a negative 1 times 2 times 3 times A. They both have a 3 and an A. So I'll factor out a 3A and be left with A minus 2. Over here, I'll be have a negative 1 times 2 times B. This will be a A times B. They both have a B. So I factor out a B, I'll be left with a negative 2 plus A. That's the same thing as A minus 2. I'll just switch the order of these 2, a positive A and a negative 2, A minus 2. Okay, so now when I look at these, they both have an A minus 2 in common. So I'll factor out the A minus 2 from the first group, and I'm left with a 3A. Factor out the A minus 2 from the second group, and I'm left with a plus B. All right. Now check using FOIL. 3A squared plus AB. There it is. A minus 6A. There it is. And a minus 2B. There it is. Okay. All right. (23) Is there a greatest common factor? No. It is a trinomial. It is in descending order. And the leading coefficient is 1. So I can go ahead and get started. A D. And then the signs, this tells me the signs are the same, and this one tells me they're both negative. So I'll put a negative and a negative. The factor pairs of 63 are 1 and 63. 2 won't go into that. 3 will go into it, 21. 4 will go into that. Nope. 5 won't. 6 won't. 7 and 9. 8 won't. That's it. All right. Since the signs are the same, they're both negative. The factor pair, a -7 and a -9, give me a -16, which is the middle term. So it'll be a -7 and a -9. All right, 24. Ooh. Okay. There is no greatest common factor. It's a trinomial. The degrees are in descending order, and the leading coefficient is 1. So we get started. X squared is x times x. This tells me that the signs are the same and that they are both negative. And then I look at the factor pairs of the last term and find the factor pair that will combine to give me a -11. Okay. All right. A -4 and a -6 are a -11. And remember, I knew that they both had to be negative, so -4, -6. And then we check using FOIL. Multiply first terms, multiply outer terms and inner terms, and they combine to give me that. Multiply last terms, and I get the last one. Okay. Okay, there is no greatest common factor. It is a trinomial. The degrees are in descending order. The leading coefficient is a 1. So I know I can factor this using this method. Q times Q is the only way to get Q squared, so I know that goes there. This tells me the signs are going to be different, and the larger number will be a negative. The factor pairs of 56 are 1 and 56, 2 and 28. 3 won't go into it. 4 will. 4 will go into that one 14 times. 5 won't. 6 won't. And then 7 times 8. Now, I need the pair that will combine to give me a -1. And I know the larger number will be negative. So a -8 and a +7 equals a -1. So this is the factor pair I'm going to use, and it'll be a -8 and a +7 because the larger number has to be negative. All right, and then check using FOIL. Number 26. All right, there's no greatest common factor. It's a trinomial, and the degrees are in descending order, and the leading coefficient is 1. So I can factor using this method. Okay. I know the signs are going to be different, and this tells me the larger number will be negative. So I have to look at the factor pairs of 55. 3 won't go into it, 4 won't, 5 will, it's 5 times 11. 6 won't go into it, 7 won't. So I know these are the only two factor pairs. Now the larger number has to, the larger number has to be negative. So a -11 plus 5 will give me a -6. So it's the 11 and 5 that I'm going to use. I forgot to write the signs in. They're going to be different. One's going to be negative, That'll be the 11, and the positive will be the 5. And then you check using FOIL. Okay, for 27, does it have, no, there's no greatest common factor. It is not a trinomial. Okay, if it's not a trinomial, when you have 4 terms, you try using grouping to factor. So we're going to group the first 2 together and the last 2 together. Okay, these 2 both have an f squared in common, and then what's left will be an f minus 1. These 2 don't have anything in common except for the understood 1, and you'll be left with an f minus 1. Now, if we look at these 2 groups, they both have an f minus 1. So when I factor out the f minus 1 from the first group, I'm left with an f squared. When I factor it out from the second group, I'm left with a plus 1. All right, so you always want to check using FOIL. So that'll be f to the 3rd. Outer term is an f, there it is. Inner term is a negative f squared. And then last, a positive 1 times a negative 1 is a negative 1. Okay. For 28, is there a greatest common factor? No. Is it a trinomial? Yes, but it's not in descending order. You have to write the degrees in descending order. Okay, so this will be g squared, because remember the degree is the number, the exponent of the variable. So this is the largest exponent. This one is the second largest exponent. And then this one has no exponent, so it's like 0. Okay, now it's in descending order according to the exponents, which is the degree. Okay, and the leading coefficient is now a 1, so we can factor using this method. G times G is the only way to get G squared. The signs are going to be the same, and they are both going to be negative, so I know that. And then I have to check the factor pairs of 48. That's 1 and 48. 2 and 24, 3, yes, 16, 4 will go into that 12 times, 5 won't go into 48, 6 will, 6 times 8 is 48. Okay, so that's a lot of factor pairs. Now we look for the factor pair that will combine to give me a 16. So that's a negative 4 and a negative 12 will give me a negative 16. Remember, I know that the signs both have to be negative. So that's how I knew to make them both negative. So negative 4 and negative 12. And then you check using FOIL, multiplying first, outer, inner, and last. Okay, 29. Is it a trinomial? Yes. The degrees are in descending order for the j. Okay, see there's two variables now, but we look at just one of the variables, and I want the leading coefficient to be 1. So we're going to put the degrees in descending order according to the j. This is j squared, j to the first, and then no j at all. So it is in descending order. Okay, and the leading coefficient is 1. So we're going to start with a j times j is the only way to get j squared. This tells me that the signs are going to be different, and this one tells me the larger one will be negative. Okay, and then I have to look at the factor pairs of 10. That'll be a 1 and a 10, 2 and 5, and that's it. Now I need the factor pair that combines to give me a -9, and the larger one has to be a negative. See, the larger number has to be negative, so that'll be a -10 plus 1 gives me a -9. So I know it's a -10 plus 1. Now, if I multiplied these together, I wouldn't get 10k squared, but if I included a k and a k, then I have -10k squared. All right, so if you have two different variables, focus on, and one of them has a leading coefficient of 1, put it in descending order according to the variable that has a coefficient of 1. And then in the first spot, in the first term of each binomial, you'll have this variable. And in the last term of each binomial, you'll have this variable. Okay. All right, there is no greatest common factor. It's in descending order according to the m's. This is m squared, m to the first, m to the 0, because there's no m here. All right, and the leading coefficient is 1. So I can start. This will be m times m, gives me the m squared. This tells me that the signs are going to be different. This tells me the larger number will be a negative. So one's going to be negative, one's going to be positive. I take the factor pairs of 56. 3 won't go into it. Okay, 4 will. 4 will go into it 14 times, and then 7 times 8. Okay, I need the factor pairs that will combine to give me a -1, and I know the larger number has to be negative. So a -8 plus 7 will give me a -1. That's how I know it's going to be an 8 and a 7. But if I go to use FOIL and multiply this out, I need it to be a -56v squared. So I'm going to put a v with both of these. So now whenever I use FOIL, m times m is m squared. This is a plus 7mv and a minus 8mv, which combine to give me the -1mv. And then the last terms will give me a -56v squared.